Hey guys, I miss you. Well, I found a copy of Roald Dahl's Danny the Champion of the World, and I figured I could keep reading it to you. So I'm going to continue on where we left off. It doesn't look the same, it's a newer copy of the book, but it is the same. So I'll read to you a chapter every day, just like when we're at school. Chapter 6 Mr. Victor Hazel. The following Friday, while we were having supper in the caravan, my father said, "If it's all right with you, Danny, I'm going to be going out again tomorrow night." "You mean poaching?" "Yes." "Will it be Hazel's Wood again?" "It'll always be Hazel's Wood," he said. "First, because that's where all the pheasants are, and second, because I don't like Mr. Hazel one little bit, and it's a pleasure to poach his birds." I must pause here to tell you something about Mr. Victor Hazel. He was a brewer of beer and he owned a huge brewery. He was rich beyond words and his property stretched for miles along either side of the valley. All the land around us belonged to him, everything on either side of the road, everything except the small patch of ground on which our filling station stood. That patch belonged to my father. It was a little island in the middle of the vast ocean of Mr. Hazel's estate. Mr. Victor Hazel was a roaring snob, and he tried desperately to get in with what he believed were the right kind of folk. He hunted with the hounds and gave shooting parties and wore fancy waistcoats, and every weekday he drove his enormous silver Rolls Royce past our filling station on his way to the brewery. As he flashed by, we would sometimes catch a glimpse of the great glistening, beery face above the wheel, pink as a ham, all soft and inflamed from drinking too much beer. "No," my father said, "I do not like Mr. Victor Hazel one little bit. I haven't forgotten the way he spoke to you last year when he came in for a fill-up." I hadn't forgotten it either. Mr. Hazel had pulled up alongside the pumps in his glistening, gleaming Rolls-Royce, and he'd said to me, "Fill her up and look sharp about it." I was 8 years old at the time. He didn't get out of the car. He just handed me the key to the cap of the gasoline tank. And as he did so, he barked out, "And keep your filthy little hands to yourself, you understand?" I didn't understand at all. So I said, "What do you mean, sir?" There was a leather riding crop on his seat beside him. He picked it up and he pointed at me like a pistol. "If you make any dirty finger marks on my paintwork," he said, "I'll step right out of this car and I'll give you a good hiding." My father was out of the workshop almost before Mr. Hazel had finished speaking. He strode up to the window of the car and placed his hands on the sill and leaned in. "I don't like you speaking to my son like that," he said. His voice was dangerously soft. Mr. Hazel did not look at him. He sat quite still in the seat of the Rolls-Royce, his tiny piggy eyes staring straight ahead. There was a smug, superior little smile around the corners of his mouth. "You had no reason to threaten him," my father went on. "He had done nothing wrong." Mr. Hazel continued to act as though my father wasn't there. "Next time you threaten someone with a good hiding, I suggest you pick on a person your own size," my father said. "Like me, for instance." Mr. Hazel still did not move. "Now go away, please," my father said. "We did not wish to serve you." He took the key from my hand and tossed it through the window. The Rolls-Royce drove away fast in a cloud of dust. The very next day, an inspector from the local Department of Health arrived and said he had come to inspect our caravan. "What do you want to inspect our caravan for?" my father asked. "To see if it's a fit place for humans to live in," the man said. "We don't allow people to live in dirty, broken-down shacks these days." My father showed him the inside of the caravan, which was spotlessly clean as always and as cosy as can be, and in the end, the man had to admit there was nothing wrong with it. Soon after that, another inspector turned up and took a sample of gasoline from one of our underground storage tanks. My father explained to me they were checking up to see if they were mixing some of the second-grade gasoline in with the first-grade stuff, which is an old dodge practiced by crooked filling station owners. Of course, we were not doing this. Hardly a week went by without some local official dropping by to check up on one thing or another, and there was little doubt, my father said, that the long and powerful arm of Mr. Hazel was reaching out behind the scenes and trying to run us off our land. So all in all, you can see why it gave my father a certain pleasure to poach Mr. Victor Hazel's pheasants. That night we put the raisins in to soak. The next day was poaching day, and don't think my father didn't know it. From the moment he got out of his bunk in the morning, the excitement began to build up inside of him. This was a Saturday, so I was home from school, and we spent most of the day in the workshop with cylinders of Mr. Pratchett's Austin 7. It was a great little car built in 1933, a tiny miracle of a machine that still ran as sweetly as ever, though it was now more than 40 years old. My father said that these Austin Sevens, better known in their time as Baby Austins, were the first successful minicars ever made. Mr. Pratchett, who owned a turkey farm near Aylesbury, was as proud as could be of this one, and he always brought it in to us for repair. Working together, we released the valve springs and drew out the valves. We unscrewed the cylinder head nuts and lifted off the head itself. Then we began scraping the carbon from the inside the head and from the top of the pistons. I want to be away by 6 o'clock, my father said. Then I will get to the wood exactly at twilight. Why at twilight, I asked. Because at twilight, everything inside the wood becomes veiled and shady. You can see to move around, but it's not easy for someone else to see you. And when danger threatens, you can always hide in the shadows, which are darker than a wolf's mouth. Why don't you wait till it gets really dark, I asked. Then you won't be seen at all. You wouldn't catch anything if you did that, he said. When night comes on, all the pheasants fly up into the trees to roost. Pheasants are just like other birds. They never sleep on the ground. Twilight, my father added, begins around 7:30 this week, and as it's at least an hour and a half's walk to the woods, I must not leave here later than 6 o'clock. Are you going to use the sticky hat, or will it be the horsehair stopper, I asked. Sticky hat, he said. I'm very fond of sticky hat. When will you be back? About 10 o'clock, he said. 10:30 at the latest. I promise I'll be back by 10:30. You're quite sure you don't mind being left alone? Quite sure, I said. But you will be all right, won't you, Dad? Oh, don't worry about me, he said, putting his arm around my shoulders and giving me a hug. But you said there wasn't a man in your dad's village that didn't get a bit shot up by the keepers sooner or later. Ah, my father said, yeah, I did say that, didn't I? But in those days, there were lots more keepers up in the woods than there are now. There were keepers behind almost every tree. How many are there now in Hazel's woods? Not too many, he said. Not too many at all. As the day wore on, I could see my father getting more and more impatient and excited. By 5 o'clock, we had finished work on the baby Austin, and together we ran her up and down the road to test her out. At 5:30, we had an early supper of sausages and bacon, but my father hardly ate anything at all. At 6 o'clock precisely, he kissed me goodbye and said, promise not to wait up for me, Danny. Put yourself to bed at 8 and go to sleep, right? He set off down the road, and I stood on the platform of the caravan watching him go. I loved the way he moved. He had that long, loping stride all countrymen have, who are used to covering great distances on foot. He was wearing an old navy blue sweater and an even older cap on his head. He turned and waved to me. I waved back. Then he disappeared around a bend in the road. All right, and that's the end of chapter 6. See you tomorrow.